Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, New Year's Day on the solar calendar. And this night is Zois Hanukkah, or some would pronounce it Zot Hanukkah, which means this is Hanukkah, the 8th night. Let's light up the darkness. This is the night we light all the lights of the menorah, and it's called Zot or Zois Hanukkah, based on the verse. This is the dedication of the altar. Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, John in Maine, Melissa in Great Neck, Guy in Ohio, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Nancy, North Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx, Yosef in the Sierra Nevada, Paul in the Great Northwest, Sharon in New Jersey, Lorraine in Texas, Karen in Northern California, Chaim in Florida, Frank in San Pedro, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Marjorie in Georgia. I'll do this one. Oops, sorry. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by our good friends Jeffrey and Sherry Hirsch, in honor of our brothers and sisters in Israel. Amen. May everyone in Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael be safe and well and protected, thriving, living to 120, learning Torah, sharing with our brothers and sisters. But tonight's a special dedication from Jeffrey and Sherry in honor of our brothers and sisters in Israel. And Jeffrey and Sherry, may you and all your family and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. Thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Okay. Our daf tonight is page 15 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. Continuing still our discussion of Mishna number 1 here in chapter 1 of Sanhedrin. And it's a long discussion because this Mishnah talked about how many judges are necessary for different types of cases, and it addressed many different types of cases. So we pick this up on page 14b near the very bottom. And a reminder, tomorrow, Thursday, special time, noon Pacific. Nina and I have an event that's going to go afternoon into the evening. So noon Pacific tomorrow and 11:30 a.m. Pacific on Friday, the regular Friday time in winter. Okay, bottom of 14b. Our Mishnah number 1 in chapter 1, taught that the valuations that are movable property. Now, we've talked about the monetary value of something that is consecrated. You have to know how much it's worth so that you can redeem it. The temple treasurer, when the temple was standing in Jerusalem, they don't want your donkey if you consecrate the value of your donkey. What they want is whatever your donkey is worth. That's how much you're going to donate in money. But valuation is not the same as monetary value. Valuation is in Hebrew erechin. Right here. Erechin. And so this is based on a particular verse in the Torah. I'm sure it'll be mentioned. It must be Leviticus 27 verses 1 through 8, where it says that people have different values, just basically based on gender and age. And it's not really saying what is a human worth. It's just that if somebody wants to donate their erech value to the temple, then it's a set amount, right? It's more about earning power than anything else. So now what we have is so basically that's where the term applies, right? When somebody says, I pledge to donate my erech value to the temple, then the Torah says what those values are. If you now tie the concept of erechin, or these valuations used for people and donations, and you tie it to something else, where what you intended basically to say was the monetary value of something, but instead you use the term erechin, then what happens? That's what we're exploring here. So the Mishnah teaches that the valuations that are movable property are performed by 3 judges. So the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of valuations that are movable property? The term valuations, erechin, generally is referring to a unique type of calculation in which one vows to contribute the value of a person according to the set amounts explicitly stated in the Torah, Leviticus 27, 1 through 8. So this type of calculation does not apply to property. So to what does the Mishnah refer? And Rav Gidl says that Rav says the Mishnah was discussing a case where a person says the valuation of this utensil is incumbent upon me to contribute. As Rav Gidl says, that Rav says, now we're on page 15a, with regard to one who says the valuation of this utensil is incumbent upon me to donate, what he must give is the monetary value of that utensil to the temple treasury. And what is the reason for this law? A person knows that a utensil has no valuation. Doesn't mean it has no monetary value. It has no valuation according to these specific verses in the Torah. And therefore, it must be that this person decided to donate money and says this expression as a reference to its monetary value using the term erechin imprecisely. So due to that reason, he gives its monetary value. The Gemara challenges this interpretation. According to this explanation, this term, erechin, erechin ha-mitaltelin, right, valuations that are movable property, is not precise. What the Mishnah should have said is valuations of movable property, erechin shel mitaltelin. Right? It should have said valuations of movable property, like the monetary value of this movable property, not valuations that are movable property. So the Gemara answers, okay, therefore amend the statement and teach valuations of movable property, right? In other words, the Mishnah was a little bit imprecise. This would have been a more precise way to word it. Rav Chizda says that Avimi says a different explanation of what was meant by this idea of valuations that are movable property. Rav's statement is discussing one who associates the object of his vow with movable property for the valuation. In other words, he took a vow to pay a valuation, right? An actual erech. Like he says, I vow to give my erech value to the temple, right? So if he's an adult male, I forget what the number is, 30 shekels or 50 shekels, something like that. So he takes this vow, but he doesn't have, let's say it's 50. I'm not sure if that's the number, but let's say the number is 50. So if he doesn't have 50 shekels on him, what he might be saying is, I'm going to give my value, my erech value, as stated in the Torah, but I'm going to pay it with movable property. So he's associating his own erech value with movable property, and he needs to then evaluate how much movable property is going to add up to 50 shekels. Right, one who associates the object of his vow with movable property for the valuation. In other words, he took a vow to pay a valuation. He did not have actual money to pay the vow, so he consecrates movable property that he owns for this purpose. This property is then appraised by 3 experts. But the Gemara challenges this interpretation. According to this explanation, this term, erechin metaltalin, valuations that are movable property, is not precise. Here, the Tana should have used the term movable property of valuations, right? Movable property that's being used to pay off a valuation. So that would have been a more accurate way to state it. And the Gemara answers, well, if that's what the interpretation is, then we should amend the statement and teach movable property of valuations. Rabbi Abahu says that Rav's statement is discussing a case of one who says, my monetary valuation is incumbent upon me to donate, right? My erech value So like I said, if the number was 50 shekels for an adult male, so he's saying, I am pledging my erech value, so I now owe 50 shekels to the temple treasury. Then, if the priest, right, a Cohen on behalf of the Holy Temple, came to collect movable property from him to pay the vow, well, it must be evaluated by 3 experts. And if he came to collect land, then it must be evaluated by 10. Rab Acha of Difti said to Ravina, granted to take out property from consecration by redeeming it, we require a panel of 3 experts, because if an error is made in the calculation, this will lead to the sin of misuse of consecrated property. Right? In other words, if I consecrate, my sheep to the temple treasury, so then we have to evaluate what is the monetary value of my sheep, and I will give that much money. That's why we want 3 experts on the panel. Because if we don't get the right number, if we just guesstimate, and it turns out that we say, well, the sheep is worth, $100, and the sheep is actually worth $120, then when I gave the $100 to the temple treasury, I didn't give all of its value, so I haven't fully redeemed that sheep. And then when I go and, eat the sheep or shear the sheep for its wool, now I'm using something that actually belongs to the temple treasury. And so that would be hekdesh, right? The sin, the transgression of using consecrated property for my own benefit. That's why we're going to be very careful when something has been consecrated and we're going to redeem it, in cases where it is redeemable, that we're very careful about getting its proper value, assessing its proper value. And that's why we have to have 3 judges on that panel. And as we said yesterday, people who are, have some knowledge in the field of whatever it is we're redeeming. Like, what is the value of this sheep? So now what they're saying is, okay, well, granted, if I have consecrated something like that sheep, and now I want to redeem it, so we need 3 experts to say what it's worth, so then I can give that much money to the temple treasury. But if what we're saying is I already owe, because I made my erech value pledge, so I already owe 50 shekels to the temple treasury, and now I want to use movable property to pay that off. So that's not that we're going to take property out of its consecrated status. We're actually going to elevate this property up to consecrated status to pay off my pledge. Does that also require 3 judges on the panel? Right? So granted, to take property out from consecration by redeeming it, we require a panel of 3 experts, because if an error is made in the calculation, this will lead to the sin of misuse of consecrated property. But to elevate property to the status of consecration, why do I need 3 judges? Ravina said to him, this is based on logical reasoning. What difference is it to me if he is elevating the property to consecration? And what difference is it to me if he is removing it? If he is removing it, what is the reason that a court is needed? It is because perhaps he will make a mistake and set a price that is too low. When he is elevating it to consecration, there is also a concern that perhaps he will make a mistake and set the price too high and thus cause a loss to the temple treasury. New subject. The Mishna taught that Rabbi Yehuda says that when calculating the valuation of consecrated property, one of the people consulted must be a priest, a Cohen. So Rav Papa said to Abaye, granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, this is understandable, as it is written in the Torah portion about redeeming consecrated property, priest. See, for example, Leviticus 27:14. But you're going to bring it to a priest in those days. You're going to bring the property to a priest. You're going to give it to a priest. Priests are mentioned very often when it comes to consecrating property, making free will offerings, bringing sacrifices, etc. But according to the opinion of the rabbis who say that any person is fit for this, why do they need the word priest? And the Gemara concludes, yeah, indeed, the matter is difficult. Right, and we follow the majority opinion, which says that we're gonna redeem consecrated property. We just need 3 people who are expert. We don't need a priest. But priest is mentioned in many of these verses. Why don't we need a priest? We don't know. We're actually going to move on. Now, the Mishnah teaches that valuations of consecrated land are made by 9 judges and 1 priest, right? So when we're going to set a value, somebody consecrated his field to the temple treasury. And what he meant was, I'm going to give the value of my field. So needless to say, we're talking about a much more valuable object than most movable property, a field, real property. So this bumps us up to a different requirement for the court that's going to evaluate its value. Not 3 experts, but 10. 10 people have to sit on this panel, and one of them does have to be a priest. So the Gemara asks, from where is this matter derived? Shmuel says, priests are written in this Torah portion 10 times. Leviticus chapter 27. One instance of the word priest is for the matter itself to teach that there is a need for a priest. And the other instances of the word are a restrictive expression following a restrictive expression, as every additional instance of priest is a restrictive term. And there is a hermeneutical principle that a restrictive expression following a restrictive expression serves only to amplify and include other matters. In this case, teaching that even 9 Israelites and 1 priest may perform the valuation of this real property. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nassan, objects to this explanation. According to the principle that a restrictive expression following a restrictive expression serves only to amplify, say that the procedure should require 5 priests and 5 Israelites, as the first incidence of the word priest indicates an actual priest. The second time, the term serves to amplify and teach that even an Israelite is fitting. And then the third time, it again indicates specifically a priest. So according to this analysis of specification, amplification, specification, the final result would require 5 priests and 5 Israelites. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, this poses a difficulty, right? And now we move on. So now we've had 3, actually, 1 at the end of yesterday and 2 here, where the Gemara is able to identify that, well, the way we got from the source text to the halacha seems to have a logic gap. So we would need, either to change the law or to get a better derivation of it. But I guess it just wasn't available. Whoever came up with the law was no longer alive. Something had been lost. There was a policy reason that was not transmitted. At any rate, they knew what the law was. They weren't quite sure how they got there. And we need to move on. Now, the Mishnah teaches that just as the valuation of consecrated land is performed by 9 judges and 1 priest, the valuation of a person for the purpose of a vow is performed in a similar manner. So then the Gemara says, what do you mean a person? Can a person be consecrated? It is not possible to consecrate a person, and therefore it is unclear what sort of valuation would be necessary, right? Before, when we were talking about the value of a person, we're just saying, just according to that simple passage in Leviticus, where you can pledge your erech value, right? That's just like it's a defined term. It just means that there are certain numbers associated with people for the purpose of making donations to the temple. But if you actually say, I am consecrating this person, or this person says he's consecrating himself to the temple treasury, what does that even mean? You can't consecrate a person, right? People are not property in that way. But in the ancient world, there were slaves. So is that what it means? That you're actually donating a slave to the temple treasury? Is that what's being said? Let's keep reading. Can a person be consecrated? It is not possible to consecrate a person, and therefore it is unclear what sort of valuation would be necessary. Rabbi Abahu says the Mishnah is referring to one who says, my monetary value is incumbent upon me to donate to the temple treasury. Now he's not saying his valuation. It's not his erech value according to the Torah numbers. He just said my monetary value, like what I am actually worth. What the heck is that? How much money is a person worth? As it is taught in a Baraisa, with regard to one who says, my monetary value is incumbent upon me, right, to donate to the temple treasury. if a person says that, then the court appraises him as a slave who is sold in the market. Right? In the ancient world, tragically, slavery was a common practice. So you actually could evaluate the monetary value of a person as a slave, right? Now, think about it. You could have somebody who's like, the CEO of a major enterprise who has the capacity, to run a huge business that in today's money, because of just in terms of the income that he generates, you could say is somebody who's worth, $1 billion or something, just millions of dollars. As a slave, right? Like he's an old guy, he's not very strong, he's not going to be put to work as the CEO of a business when he's enslaved. So his value would obviously be much lower. But that is what they mean by monetary value. What he would bring in the slave market, that is what he is pledging to donate to the Holy Temple. Someone who says, my monetary value is incumbent upon me, the court appraises him as a slave who is sold in the market, and the price that would be paid for him as a slave is the amount that he must give to the temple treasury. And as a slave is compared to land with regard to the laws of transactions, the valuation is performed by a panel of 9 experts and a priest, as is done when land is appraised, right? So when land is appraised, it's appraised by 9 judges, 10 judges, one of whom has to be a priest. And if we have to appraise a slave, it would be the same because slaves are comparable to land in many areas of Jewish law. Rabbi Avin raises a dilemma with regard to a person's hair that was consecrated and which is ready to be shorn. By how many judges is the appraisal made? Is such hair deemed similar to hair that has already been shorn, has already been cut off, and accordingly it is appraised like other movable property, i.e. by 3 judges? Or is it considered as hair that is still attached to the body, and therefore it should be appraised by 10 judges? By the way, not long ago, we saw the movie Gladiator, the original movie, with Russell Crowe from like 20 years ago. Holds up quite well. And the reason I'm mentioning it now is because there was a character in the movie who was wearing a wig. And I was like, did they have wigs? 2,000 years ago? Answer, yeah, they had wigs. And here we're reading, this is the period between 1500 and 1800 years ago. What they're talking about, and they had wigs, so when they're talking about the value of hair, I presume that they're talking about its value because it could be made into a wig, which I think is really interesting that they had that tech. I mean, I don't know how wigs are made, but for it to look at all natural, they must have had some kind of glue. I'm sure someone here knows a little bit about wig making. I don't, but whatever the process was for attaching, the hair to the skull cap so that it would work as a wig, they had that 2,000 years ago. I think that's fascinating. And that's why here we're talking about the value of hair. So the question is, when the hair is on your head and he's consecrating it, right? What's he saying? Are we saying the value of his hair, but it's a body part? So therefore, we need 10 judges, because we've already said you need 10 judges, one of whom is a priest, to evaluate the worth of a person? Or do we say, since once the hair is cut off, then it's movable property, and we only need 3 judges for this? So what's the answer? The Gemara suggests, come and hear a resolution of this dilemma from a Baraisa. Concerning one who consecrates his own slave, a person who derives benefit from the slave is not liable for misuse of consecrated property, since the slave's body does not become consecrated, which is so interesting. So what are you consecrating? If you consecrate a slave, you are not consecrating the slave's body. So what are you consecrating? Presumably his labor. But let's keep reading. A slave's body does not become consecrated. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says one who derives benefit from the slave's hair is liable for misuse of consecrated property. And we maintain that it is with regard to hair that is ready to be shorn that they disagree. And the Gemara concludes, learn from here that the question of whether such hair is viewed as already cut off is a dispute between the Tanaim. Somebody has long, beautiful hair. that if they cut it off, they could sell for a lot of money because it could be made into a beautiful wig. Do we say that if he consecrated his hair, it's as if it's already cut off? Or do we say, well, no, it's not as if it's already cut off because it's not cut off? And what's the big difference between, let's say, grapes that are ripe and ready to be harvested, where in some other areas of the law, we say that if it's so ripe that it's ready to be harvested, it's as if it's already been harvested. The difference between that is grapes reach a maximum growth. Hair can keep growing, right? So whenever you cut it off, you stop its growth. But if you would keep it on, it would just keep growing and become more valuable. So let's keep going here. That this is a dispute between Tanaim. And the Gemara suggests, let us say that the opinion of these Tanaim is like the opinion of those Tanaim. As we learned in the Mishna in Tractate Shavuot 42b, Rabbi Meir says, there are entities that are like land in one aspect and are not like land in other aspects. And the rabbis do not concede to him. How so? If one said to another, I gave you 10 vines laden with grapes, and I want to receive their value, and the other one says there were only 5. So Rabbi Meir deems the defendant liable to take an oath in accordance with the law concerning one who admits to part of a claim. If I say you owe me $100 and you say, no, Sal, I only owe you 50. Okay, so you're admitting that part of my claim is true. I said you owe me 100, you say you owe me 50, so that's a partial admission. When there's a partial admission, you could take an oath that you don't owe me the other 50, and if I couldn't bring evidence to the contrary, we'd be done, right? You would be set just by taking that oath. This case would be over. That only applies to movable property, money or movable property. It doesn't apply. We don't have this law of taking an oath in place of paying the rest in the case of a partial admission when it comes to land. Only movable property. So what Rabbi Meir is saying is that vines that are laden with grapes that are just ready to be harvested, this is like movable property, even though it's still attached to the ground. And the rabbis say any item that is attached to the land is viewed as the land itself, and the law is that there is no oath in cases of claims with regard to land. No partial admission, no taking an oath. And Rabbi Yosei Bar Chanina says, in this Mishnah, we are dealing with grapes that are ready to be picked. So one sage, Rabbi Meir, holds that they are considered as grapes that have already been picked, i.e. movable property. And the other sage, meaning the rabbis who overrule Rabbi Meir, holds that they are not considered as grapes that have already been picked. And this suggestion, as the explanation of our dispute, is rejected. No. This cannot be proven from here, as you may even say that the opinion of the rabbis with regard to the hair is similar to the opinion of Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah. Only there, with regard to the vines, Rabbi Meir says they are viewed as already picked, because the more he leaves them on the vine, the more they become lean and deteriorate. Once they're ready to be picked, they need to be picked. If they stay on the vine, they're actually going to become worse and worse. They're going to deteriorate. Consequently, the grapes are viewed as already picked because they have reached their maximum value. But in the case of his hair, the more he leaves it on his head, the more it improves, as longer hair has greater value. Consequently, it cannot be said that hair that is ready to be shorn is viewed as already shorn. New subject. The Mishnah teaches that cases of capital law, right, cases that can lead to execution, are judged by 23 judges, and that an animal that copulated with a person is also judged by 23 judges because the animal stands to be executed. Now, the Gemara comments, the Mishnah categorically teaches this law, indicating that there is no difference if this was an ox that copulated with a male, and there is no difference if it was an ox that copulated with a female. Okay. So, the law goes everywhere that there's a possible halakhic question. So, what can I say? We're going there. So what they're talking about here is bestiality, according to the Torah, is a death penalty offense. The question that's being asked is there a difference when the animal was on the giving end or the receiving end of the act of bestiality? So granted, the sort, and they're saying it doesn't matter whether it was on the receiving end or the giving end, the animal stands to be executed if it was involved in bestiality with a human. So the Gemara asks, granted, the source for this law is clear in the case where the ox copulated with a female, right, with a female human, as it is written explicitly, and if a woman approaches any animal and lies down with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. That's Leviticus 20, verse 16. But with regard to an ox that copulated with a male human, from where do we derive that the animal is to be killed? And the Gemara answers, as it is written in Exodus 22:18, whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Now, this verse is not needed for the matter of one who actively lies with the animal, i.e. a male human who sexually penetrates the animal. So apply this verse to the matter of the one who causes the animal to lie with him, right? A male human who was on the receiving end of a penetration by an ox. That the ox stands to be executed for that. And so with the man. And there is another verse, Leviticus 20, verse 15, that explicitly addresses a man penetrating the animal sexually. This verse from Exodus is therefore understood to be referring to the case where he causes the animal to penetrate him. And the merciful one brought this forth using the active term lies, as in lies with something, to compare one who causes the animal to lie with him to one who actively lies with the animal, in order to teach that just as in the case of one who lies with an animal, he and his animal are to be judged by 23 judges, so too, in the case of one who causes an animal to lie with him, he and his animal are to be judged by 23 judges. Since it's a death penalty offense, 23 judges are required. Let's move on. The Mishna teaches that an ox that is to be stoned is judged by 23 judges. Right now, an ox that is to be stoned, now we're talking about something else. This would be an ox that killed a person. And this is judged by 23 judges. As it is stated, the ox shall be stoned, and also its owner shall be put to death. That's Exodus 21:29. Now, from this verse, it is derived that just as the manner of the death of the owner, so is the manner of the death of the ox. Consequently, it follows that 23 judges are necessary to adjudicate the case of the ox that is to be stoned, right, because it gored and killed a person, or trampled and killed a person. Abaye said to Rava, from where do we know that this phrase, and also its owner shall be put to death, comes to teach that just as the manner of the death of the owner, so is the manner of the death of the ox? Now we're on page 15b. Why not say instead that this verse comes to teach that the owner of the ox is liable to receive the death penalty, right? So are we saying that the owner of the ox is put to death? Or is this verse coming to teach that, well, whatever manner of death and whatever manner of trial for that capital punishment is the owner is subjected to, such is the procedure for the ox that the owner owns. Those would be different teachings. So why not say that it's one and not the other? So Rava responded, if so, let it write in the same verse, only the ox shall be stoned and also its owner, and let it be silent and not add more. It would be clear that the owner is also put to death. Since the verse added additional words, the explicit term shall be put to death, it is clear that the intention is to teach that just as the manner of the death of the owner, so is the manner of the death of the ox. Abaye said, had the merciful one written the verse in this manner, I would say that the owner is executed by stoning. But the Gemara rejects this. Would it enter your mind to say that he should be executed by stoning? If he killed the person himself, he would be executed by the sword, which is deemed a lighter punishment. If his property killed the victim, could he be given the more severe execution by stoning? So here, whereas in America, in states that have the death penalty, and I think there is a federal death penalty these days, but in whatever jurisdiction, if there is a death penalty, okay, then there's one kind of death penalty that they use in that jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions use, the gas chamber. Some, I don't think that any of them use the electric chair anymore. Most, I think, use the, like putting some kind of poison basically in the vein, some kind of drug cocktail that executes the condemned person. But within any jurisdiction, they just have one form of execution, as far as I know. But in the Torah, there are different kinds of execution that are used for different kinds of crimes. So let me give you a little background on this. So the first that they're talking about is stoning. Stoning is one of the 4 methods of execution imposed by the court mentioned in the Torah. Recall, of course, that in terms of a court actually executing a criminal, it almost never happened because the person would have to be warned by the witnesses, if you do that crime, you're going to be liable to the death penalty, and then they go ahead and do it anyway. That's in most cases. There are some where you actually don't need the warning. But in most cases, you do. But let's just what we're talking about right now is, okay, well, if somehow all of the elements were met and there was a court that was, actually going to step up and, condemn this person to execution and carry it out, which execution would they use? Okay. So stoning is one of the 4 methods of execution imposed by the court that is mentioned in the Torah. And it is considered by halacha, by Jewish law, to be the most severe of the death penalties. The prohibitions that entail the death penalty punishable by stoning include incest with one's mother, male homosexual intercourse, cursing God, cursing one's parents, idolatry, the desecration of Shabbos, and adultery with a betrothed young woman, right? Which is analogous to rape, really. But you see, desecration of Shabbos, which sadly is, a crime that probably most Jews in the world today commit because they don't even know what the laws of Shabbos are, because so many people are tragically distant from their history and their tradition and observance. But you see how serious it is when we don't keep Shabbos, right? Again, it doesn't happen. No court probably ever in history, except for Moses in the desert, the wood gatherer that we read about in the Torah. But since then, probably no court ever gave the death penalty for violating Shabbos. But, it's considered to be at that level of like incest with a parent, right? So that's stoning, right? That's considered the worst of the capital punishments. All of them result in death, but this one is thought to be the most painful or the most severe. So how was it done? Stoning was performed in the following manner. The individual to be executed was pushed to the ground from a height of 8 cubits, which is not that high. That's like 12 feet. And if he did not die upon impact, the witnesses whose testimony convicted him would cast a heavy stone upon him. And if he survived that as well, then the entire populace would continue stoning him until he died. So that is a little bit, it's not so dissimilar from the mental image of, throwing stones, like they're actually dropped, not thrown. But there you go. Now, the next form of execution mentioned is execution by the sword. This is a swordsman, an executioner comes and chops your head off. Decapitation by the sword is one of the 4 methods of capital punishment imposed by the court that is mentioned in the Torah. Who would receive this punishment? A murderer, the inhabitants of an idolatrous city, a city that, Jewish city that has become more than half the people are committing idolatry, and those who rebel against the king are punished in this manner. Okay. And then there's strangulation. Strangulation is considered the least severe, which I think is interesting because, it seems pretty quick, right? The sword comes down, you're done. But it's bad for the body, right? When you chop the head off the body, you could say that the body has been desecrated. So that's why it's considered a more severe punishment You can see stoning like really just messes up the body. Decapitation removes the head, but otherwise doesn't mess it up so much. Strangulation leaves the body largely intact. Strangulation is the least severe of the 4 types of capital punishment administered by the court. It was performed by wrapping a scarf around the violator's neck and then pulling simultaneously at both ends until he expired. The following transgressions are to be executed by strangulation: one who strikes his father or mother, a kidnapper, a rebellious elder, as we discussed yesterday, a false prophet, and most adulterers, including a man who committed adultery with a priest's daughter. Okay, so the Gemara asks, but perhaps this term that the Merciful One wrote, shall be put to death, is to be lenient with him, to remove his sentence from the category of execution by the sword, and instead sentence him to death by strangulation. So this works out well according to the one who says that strangulation is more severe than the sword. According to that opinion, there is no place for such a claim, as the punishment is certainly not more severe than that of an actual murderer. But according to the one who says that strangulation is a lighter punishment, then what is there to say? So the Gemara responds, it would not enter your mind to think this, as it is written in Exodus 21:30, if a ransom be placed upon him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is placed upon him. Now what we're talking about here is if your ox kills someone, right? So your ox now is going to be executed because it killed a person. Are you executed? Right? I mean, unless you led the ox, its horns into the other person, and you really committed murder by way of your ox, the answer is no, right? A person whose ox, even if he was negligent, negligence is not murder. Right? So what would happen is that somebody whose ox kills another person, they're subject to the ransom, right? They're gonna have to pay heavy damages because a person was killed, but they're not subject to the death penalty. And that's what they're deriving here. And the Torah says it explicitly in Exodus 21:30 that a ransom is placed on such a person. And if it enters your mind to say that he is liable to receive the death penalty, well, that verse could not be understood for the following reason. But isn't it written, you shall take no ransom for the life of a murderer who was convicted to die, for he shall be put to death. So for a murderer, you don't take a ransom, but the owner of an ox that killed does have to give a ransom. So then clearly the owner of the ox who killed doesn't get executed himself. Since in this case there is a ransom payment, it is clear that there is no actual death penalty involved. Now, this line of reasoning is rejected. On the contrary, the additional phrase in the verse is necessary due to this argument itself. If one killed a person himself, it would not be enough for him to make a payment of money. He must be punished only with the actual execution. But if his ox killed someone, I would say that he should redeem himself with money, but that if he does not pay money, he would receive the death penalty. Rather, the matter cannot be decided on the basis of these verses, and it must be proven by what Chizkiah says. And so the school of Chizkiah taught this baraisa. The verse states, he that struck him shall be put to death, he is a murderer. From which it is inferred, you execute him for his act of murder, but you do not execute him for his ox's act of murder. Now, a dilemma was raised before the sages. By how many judges would an ox at Mount Sinai have been judged? Now, what's the discussion we're about to have now, and we're actually getting close to the end, so if you have questions or comments, please get them in now. But this is really a lovely discussion here because it shows that what the sages were always after is truth, right? Understanding the Torah, digging down, understanding all the layers of meaning to discover all the truths that are contained in the Torah. Whether there was a practical significance or not. So what they're going to talk about here is when the Torah was being given at Mount Sinai, and all the people were gathered around the mountain, and God said to Moses, tell the people to be prepared on the third day, right? And so the men and women needed to separate so that everybody would be in a state of purity when the Torah was given. and God gave Moses several instructions to give the people. And one of those instructions was, don't step on this mountain. Right? When God's presence is on the mountain, either the mountain is going to be so filled with, holy energy that it's going to be, it's just going to be too perilous that a person would just be killed, as a natural consequence of being on the mountain at that time. Or because, God was saying, my holiness will be on the mountain and you are not to approach that, because people are not God and God is not people, right? There's a separation. And so God said that anyone who steps on this mountain, shall be killed or shall be executed even, right? So it was a death penalty offense to be on that mountain at that time. Now, this is a one-time event, right? God appeared at Mount Sinai and gave the Ten Commandments only once in history. So there was a law about no person and no animal being on Mount Sinai at the time that God said, don't be here, that only applied once in history. Never, and no animals walked on the mountain, right? And no people walked on the mountain, so no death penalty was assigned. But what if somebody had walked on the mountain? So that's the law that we're studying now. It makes no difference that it has no practical significance. What's the answer? Right? It does an animal that walked on Mount Sinai at that time, would it require a court of 23 judges to condemn it to die? Or would 3 be enough? Or it would be some other number? Okay, so let's just see. So a dilemma was raised before the sages. By how many judges would an ox at Mount Sinai have been judged? At the time of the giving of the Torah, it was forbidden to ascend unto Mount Sinai. As it was written, Exodus 19:13, no hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot through, whether animal or man, it shall not live. Right now, did God say, if somebody approaches the mountain, you will stone him, right? You will assemble a court and stone him? Or I'm telling you as God that, somebody walks on that mountain, they're going to be stoned. Unclear. But they're taking the question as, no, it was a law that it would have been a death penalty offense. So how many judges would have needed to sit on that panel? So if an ox did ascend on the mountain, how many judges would be necessary to sentence it to execution by stoning? And the Gemara explains the question. Do we derive a law that applies only to a specific time in history from a law that applies for all generations? And accordingly, any animal that is to be stoned is judged by 23 judges or not, right? Or do we say that, no, that was a one-time thing and we don't know what the law would have been in that situation because we can't derive the law for one time in history from a law that was good for all generations? The Gemara answers, come in here a solution from that which Rami bar Yecheskel taught. The verse states, whether animal or man, it shall not live. The comparison serves to teach that just as a person is judged by 23 judges, so too an animal is judged by 23 judges. Not by comparing necessarily to laws of other times, but just within the verse itself, it compared an animal to a man. Now, new subject. The Mishna, back to Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1. The Mishnah recorded a dispute with regard to the judgment of a lion or a wolf. Does this judgment require 23 judges? Okay, so if an ox, killed a person, we understand, that there's laws about that. Was it an innocent ox, without a history of goring? Was it an ox that has a history of goring? Okay, there's a whole bunch of laws. Now we're talking about other dangerous animals. So Reish Lakish says, and that dispute concerns a lion or a wolf that has killed a person. But if they have not killed, then no, they may not be executed. Right? So do we say, well, lions and wolves, if they're loose and they're like near humans, that is a danger that is so great that it would be better just, kill. Back then, spears, bows and arrows, whatever weapon they had, if the lion is getting too close to the humans, yeah, that's too dangerous, kill it. Or do we say, what are you talking about? You have no right as a human to kill an animal because it might become dangerous, because it might kill a human. We don't know. Until it kills a human, you can't, just condemn it and kill it. But really? Don't we say humans are infinitely more valuable than animals? Why wouldn't we kill it if there's a danger that it might kill the human? Right? So Reish Lakish says this dispute concerns a lion or a wolf that has killed. In that case, do we need 23 judges or not? But if the animal has not killed, then you can't execute it. So apparently Reish Lakish holds that they have the capability of being tamed and domesticated, and consequently they might have owners. So it is not permitted to kill them without due cause, because you might be destroying property that belongs to another person. And Rabbi Yochanan says the dispute applies even if they have not killed. So apparently Rabbi Yochanan holds that they do not have the capability of being tamed, and therefore they do not have owners, and if we're concerned that they present a danger to the community, we kill them. So we learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Eliezer says, anyone who kills them first merits. Right? In other words, if a lion or a wolf is near, to where humans live, according to Rabbi Eliezer, whoever kills them first has done a service to the community. So granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, what does he merit? So when it says he merits, this person who's done the service to the community, what does he merit? What is his reward? It can be explained that he merits, i.e., he acquires their hides, the skins of the lion or the wolf. Since these animals are by definition ownerless, since they cannot be tamed and domesticated, at least back then, according to them, whoever kills them first may take the hide for himself. But according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, who says that these animals could be domesticated and tamed, they might belong to someone. So what does this person merit who went and killed them? Since according to Reish Lakish, the Mishnah is discussing a case where they have already killed, the sages made their status equivalent to those whose verdicts have been issued in court, and oxen that are stoned are items from which deriving benefit is prohibited. Right? Like once an ox has killed and now has been condemned to die by the court, once it's slaughtered, you can't eat the meat, and you can't even take the skin to make leather, because that's an animal that killed a human. So, it's just destroyed. The Gemara answers, what is the meaning of merits according to Reish Lakish? It means that he merits according to heaven, meaning that he has performed a mitzvah by destroying a harmful animal. But the Gemara then relates, it is taught in a baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Reish Lakish, both an ox that killed and a different domesticated animal or undomesticated animal that killed, right? If an animal has killed a human, they are sentenced by 23 judges. You can't just, I saw that animal kill someone, so I'm just going to go kill it. It's interesting, right? I mean, it's very interesting if you're talking about a lion. You know that a lion killed a person, or you suspect that particular lion killed a person. So it needs to be tried by a court. You're saying that before we can kill it, we need to capture it so that we can, bring it to court and try it? This is a little bit hard to understand, so let's keep reading. Rabbi Eliezer says an ox that killed is sentenced by 23 judges. But with regard to other domesticated animals and undomesticated animals that killed, anyone who kills them first merits, with that act according to heaven. It is therefore apparent that the disagreement concerns only animals that have killed, and that, as Reish Lakish explained the term, merits indicates only a moral achievement, but not a financial acquisition like receiving the skins of the animal. So we can't just go kill an animal that seems dangerous, only if it has actually killed a human being. And then in terms of a court of 23, that only applies to oxen. And, in the ancient world, oxen were very valuable animals that were always the property of someone. And that's why it requires this court of 23. But other kinds of animals that are less valuable than oxen or which are undomesticated, if they killed a human, you don't have to take it to court. You could just kill it and, protect the community. And finally, the Mishnah states, our Mishnah stated that with regard to these dangerous animals, Rabbi Akiva says, their death is decreed by 23 judges. Even the lion has to be brought to court. And the Gemara asks, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva is identical to the opinion of the first Tana. What is the novelty of his statement? And the Gemara answers, the difference between them relates to the laws of a snake. According to the first Tana, a snake is also sentenced by 23 judges, whereas Rabbi Akiva holds that all domesticated and undomesticated animals other than snakes are included in this requirement. But no, a snake that is dangerous, anyone can go ahead and kill it and not be worried that it was an extrajudicial procedure. Okay, a few questions. Yosef, question for my fiance, Michelle and I. Does the consecration status of an item place more monetary value on it? Is this what the valuation means? No. If it's consecrated, that just means that now it has been set aside. Really, to sanctify or to consecrate something, really what it means, and the word, kiddush or kaddish or kodesh, all these related terms which have to do with holiness, what they really mean is set aside, separated, right? Now you can no longer use it for yourself and you have to redeem its value. The fact that it's consecrated doesn't increase its value, but it does mean that you have to figure out what its value is and pay that to the temple treasury before you can take that object back and start using it again. Now, there was a conversation about wigs. Bill says not only did they have wigs, they could be unbelievably expensive. Egypt was famous for its wigs for many centuries as well. Joe said mummies of wig wearers have a slight band of indentation that encircles their heads. Wow. Michelle said Asian slaves were coveted for their natural straight black hair and were coveted for Egyptian wigs. And Joe says higher class women shaved their own hair and wore wigs. It cut down on insect infestation. This is fascinating. And the wigs could be cleaned or replaced as women wore small mounds of scented wax as a way to perfume themselves. Thanks, you guys. It's so interesting. Bill says, of course, this then raises the question for the sages, how do you know that it was a death penalty law and not a warning from God that setting foot on the mountain would, as it were, result in the mountain setting much more than a foot on you? I take for granted that they're right. I would just like to know their thought process. Well, and it didn't happen, right? So I think what they're saying is, okay, if it meant that it was a death penalty offense and not just a natural consequence of setting foot on God's mountain during the giving of Torah, so if it meant that it was a death penalty offense, how would the death penalty have been applied? The whole thing is a hypothetical since it didn't happen. But I think that's how they were evaluating it. I don't know that they could know that it was meant as a death penalty. I mean, I guess there was, we're learning in English, my Hebrew's weak. Perhaps the way that it's worded in the Torah, would give them a stronger connection to other kinds of death penalty cases as opposed to just a natural consequence from God. And Bill also says this is a somewhat separate question because it's a somewhat broader question than what the rabbis are talking about here. But we may well say now in the 21st century that we have learned from hard experience that we should only kill predator animals when we are sure that it's the only option for securing the community. The case study here is, of course, wolves in Yellowstone National Park. The reintroduction of wild wolves has actually resulted in greater flourishing of all species native to the park because they played a proper role in the ecosystem. Shocking absolutely no one, the Creator is better at running the natural world than we are, and He has created nothing without purpose. Right, so I think what Bill is saying is that if we are concerned that there's a predator species that might harm some person somewhere, and so we go in and remove all the members of that predator species, we might harm the ecosystem in a great way and lead to much more harm even to people, right? So, good reason to go with the opinion that said, yeah, we don't kill even dangerous animals unless they have killed, not because they might kill. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, special time, noon Pacific tomorrow. All the best and enjoy this 8th night of Hanukkah. Zois